Hello, everyone. This is Ed Breniger, host of the Eddy Network podcast. And today I'm bringing to you the first episode of a series of videos that I'm producing on the change in culture of leadership. And I'm looking back at this change over the course of the last 4 decades. I became interested in leadership in 1984 when I was asked as a young minister doing urban community ministry in Atlanta to join a local business association board that had embraced not just the business community, but embraced the entire community of the section of downtown Atlanta that the church was in. And I saw something in that organization that I had never seen before, which was a group of people. In this case, there were 45 members of the board. These 45 members operating as one. And I realized that this is what leadership is. It is how you bring people together to work together, to collaborate, to cooperate, to communicate together so that they can achieve things that they cannot achieve on their own. And when I first saw that and I said, oh, this is what my life is to be focused on, two of the first things that I read was, and this was over a couple of years period of time. One was Peter Drucker's Innovation and Entrepreneurship, which I highly recommend that you read this. And it's almost an anachronism now. The fact that we have so much content on innovation and entrepreneurship now, I think if you read that, you realize that we really don't. We talk a lot about it, but we don't really have what he would have considered the kind of entrepreneurship and innovation he talks about. The other work, which has even had less exposure, shall we say, is James McGregor Burns' book Leadership. Let's get that so you can see it. I want to read to you a couple of sentences from the prologue, and I think this captures to me not just what he was seeing in the mid 1970s. So understand this came out in 1978. So this is right after the debacle of the Nixon administration, right after Watergate, right after the end of the Vietnam War. And this is what he wrote. The crisis of leadership today is the mediocrity or irresponsibility of many of the men and women in power. But leadership rarely rises to the full need for it. The fundamental crisis underlying mediocrity is intellectual. If we know all too much about our leaders, we know far too little about leadership. And I would agree with that. And I would say that that's even more true today than it was almost 50 years ago when he wrote that. I've seen that the shift that I have experienced in the world of leadership is one from leadership as a technical thing that you learn the craft of leadership and you perform that within the context of a business or some kind of organization to the culture of leadership, which is something that is done between people. And the culture that I have seen in particular that has changed began, let us say, with 9/11, the attack on the World Trade Center in New York on September 11th, 2001, the Great Recession of the late 2000s, and then all the things that have taken place between 2008 and today. Here we are at the end of 2025. And so many things have taken place that I think we have no real awareness of what is transpiring. I want to suggest to you that whatever you think is going on is only part of the story. And I think you should be concerned about your lack of understanding and your lack of perception. I'm concerned about my own. In fact, I've been concerned about this for so long that it really is more the dominant theme of my life than leadership it is. How do I understand what's actually going on in the world? And I've traveled to, I think 26, 27 countries over the last 45 years, 50 years. And what I realize is that there's a lot more going on than we can see. In fact, I would say our perception is very much limited to whatever we see right off the tip of our nose and right at the extent of our reach with our arms and hands. That we really don't know much beyond that. And what we don't know is really worrisome to me, because it's not just that we don't have access to it, which we should. I mean, we have our phones and our computers, we have the digital culture we have, but we don't seem to use it for that purpose. In fact, I would say my experience as a consultant for 20 years and now as a writer and thought leader for the last 10 is that we are looking constantly for reassurance and confirmation of our own biases. We want to feel okay that I don't have to really change anything. I don't really have to become someone different. And I'll be okay because my bank account is okay, or my marriage is okay, my kids are doing well, my neighborhood's safe. If we persist in believing that those are the sufficient things that hold our life together, then I think we are mistaken. I think there are a lot of things that I would call symptoms that are taking place, and they're symptoms of larger forces that are actually beyond the force of human agency. Obviously, there's a lot going on where people are making choices and things are happening. There's violence, there's war, there's economic travail, there's turbulence within organizations and within communities, within social groups. But all those are symptoms of larger things that are happening. So, for example, I would say that AI is a symptom. It's not a cause. It's a symptom of something else. I would say that the turbulence of the last 30 years is a symptom of something larger than what we have assumed it to be. Um, I would say globalization, which I'm tracking back to the easy point is the post World War I world is where the course of globalization really began to take flight. And I see it simply as a symptom as well of forces that had begun a couple of hundred years before that at the beginning of the Enlightenment. Um, I think that our phones, these are these are digital mechanisms that we use, and they're symptoms of something larger that is taking place. Is it a symptom of control? Is it a symptom of agency? Is it a symptom of our lack of innovation? Not the innovation of the people who created the phone, but the innovation, our own innovation of being able to change, to create change. And I would even say that Donald Trump is a symptom. He's not a cause of whatever disruption you think he is causing. He's a symptom. And I mean, I've been watching this for a long time, and I would say that if things had not transpired over the last 20 years before he emerged as a candidate for the presidency of the U.S., if those things had not taken place, he would not be president today. And why do those things happen? I think I think people made choices. People in power made choices, and they set into play a course of change that we're now having to reckon with. And it kind of goes to what I see in reading Joseph Tainter, anthropologist, archaeologist, philosopher, as he talks about the collapse of societies. And one of the things he has said, and he has said this to me directly, is that no society ever simplifies. There's no society in all of human history has ever simplified, and they've all collapsed at some point. Well, are we headed for a collapse? I don't know. Can we simplify? I don't know. I think those are all questions we should be asking. I think the questions that I have been writing about on Substack since January of 2022. And I have been talking about with my guest on the podcast since February of 2023. And we'll continue to do that. And I'll continue to write. This year, I have focused on the question of what is time and what is reality. And that seems very philosophical and very abstract, but it is not, because how you view time is how you view yourself. And if you view yourself as simply an agent of the present, that there's nothing more than whatever is present, that only your only concern is what's going to happen today, then you do not see what has transpired in the past that is now affecting you today, that is causing you to be restricted from things that you could be doing if you had had a different view of time. So I think that the idea that there's a continuity of time between the past through the present into the future is very real. It's the reality, it's more of a reality than almost anything that we experience. And it is a reality that we can grasp hold of. And so I would suggest that you take time to consider the course of your life. Where did you start as a child? What was it as a child that found you found interesting? What is it as a child that you found painful or traumatic? All of these things matter in how your life has developed. And so these cultural changes that we are all living in, I mean, let's I'll be honest with you. I think we're not at the beginning stage of the glory of globalization. I think we're at the end stage of it. I think it's at a point of collapsing under its own minimalistic weight. So what happens when this global structure of organizations and institutions and governments and corporations, and what happens when it fails? I mean, we saw it during COVID when the restrictions on the supply chains caused huge disruption in the world. I mean, I'm not saying it's a minor thing, it was a simple thing. We saw all those cargo ships sitting in Long Island, Long Beach Bay, waiting to be unloaded, but the restrictions on the COVID restrictions made it difficult for them to follow through on what they would normally be doing, which is unloading ships and loading ships and moving forward. This is the kind of complexity that we have now come to know. This is the nature of our world, and it's at a level of complexity that many of you that I know and many of you who I've interviewed have a far greater grasp on than I do. And I respect what you see. I think that what we do not recognize is that even beyond what we see, even beyond what we know, even beyond what we believe we know, there's a level of there's dimensions to this that are far beyond what we can grasp at this point. And the only way we can grasp that is by stepping back and becoming self-critical, skeptical of everybody that we hear. I mean, you should be skeptical of what I say. I freely accept your skepticism as a necessary part of our communication. You should challenge everything that I say, and if so, then I will freely challenge everything that you think. Because I want not that we agree, I want that we see things that we did not see before and that we're able to move into action that we could not have done before. I think this is the beauty of Mark McGrath's work. of elevating the work of John Boyd at a very much a meme level of reorientation. If you're not reorienting your life on a daily basis, then you're allowing the forces of change to affect you in ways that you don't have a clue. So here's what I want to do. This is what I'm going to do, because I think that there is a need for conversation about this. And and I'm willing to listen to you and you tell me what you think needs to be done. And I will respond respectfully and honestly. And if I can participate in what you see as something that is needed, I will participate. But this is what I want to do. I have created a number of frameworks over the years that have helped me explain what I see going on. Probably the most prominent of those is the spectacle of the real, which first appeared in print in 2013. But there are other things like the two global forces. If they are unfamiliar with that, there's a global force of centralized institutions of governance and finance. And then there's a global force of decentralized networks of relationships. I see both of those. I live in both of those. My relationships around the world, my relationships around the world with people I know in other countries, on other continents, is not a global relationship. It is a local relationship. Because my concern in my relationship to them is what is happening where they live, what is happening in their world, with their communities, with their businesses, with that. That's where my concern is. So that's a local network of relationships kind of thing. And then there is this idea that I borrowed from Edward Shills called center and periphery. And the center and the periphery is really about leadership in organizations and leadership in communities. I mean, these are frames that I've been using as ways of talking about what I see happening. And then the thing which I've had the longest is the circle of impact model of leadership, which I can apply in all of this. These are all ways for me to talk about what I see happening. So what I'm going to do is over the next 5 to 6 weeks, I'm going to produce a video like this one that will be within the context of the Eddy Network podcast. And every Thursday between now and probably the middle of January, I will post on one of these ideas, one of these ways of understanding the culture of change. But let me finish what I am introducing today with this thought. When I became interested in leadership and I read Burns's leadership book and I read Peter Drucker and I read a lot of other people, took a seminar course from a couple of Harvard Business School graduates who lived in Atlanta, and I came to the conclusion that I disagreed with most of what I was reading about leadership. I agreed with Burns and I agreed with Drucker, but a lot of the other stuff I disagreed with because it felt like all it was we were to practice a form of hero worship of people who were CEOs of corporations. We elevate their status and their presence as if, okay, this is what leadership is. And we would do the same thing with governmental leaders. And so I disagreed with what I saw because I felt like, and this is where I disagree with Drucker. Drucker said that you know who a leader is because they have followers. Well, that's the old model. That's the old way of thinking about it. Because what we didn't have in the 1970s when I was growing up, we didn't have access to information. And we didn't have access to people in the way that we do now. And I know for you all who are digital natives, who are maybe Gen X's, but particularly millennials and Gen Zs, you don't really cannot grasp how isolated we were, where the only information we received on a daily basis was the newspaper, the local newspaper, or it could be the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, and the three broadcast networks and the public television network. And that was the extent of our sources of information. And so in that sense, we were under a information control level that we are not today. It still means that today you have to be critical, self-critical, and skeptical of what you're reading, but you have access to information now that you did not have, that we did not have 50 years ago. And I welcome that. And what it has shown me is that people like Marshall McLuhan, people like Jean Baudrillard, people like Guy Debord, people who understood that there was this manipulation of information distribution. Those people helped us see that whatever we are receiving is not the whole story. It may not even be a true story, but it is a story that is intended for us to believe and to take on as our own story. In effect, we become agents of the disinformation or the malinformation or the poor information or the manipulated information or the propaganda that comes through all these different media and social media avenues. And so the significant change that I saw and that I grasped hold of was this belief that leadership is not a role or a title in an organization, but rather it is how we describe the functioning of human beings. And we and I describe that in my little definition of leadership, which is all leadership begins with personal initiative to create impact that makes a difference that matters. And I believe that taking personal initiative to create impact is primarily to be focused on our local communities. Because I do not believe that change is top down. I believe that all lasting change is bottom up. It happens where you and me, our neighbors, our families, the people we work through in the office, that we create the change which is sustainable. It comes from my experience with companies and with municipalities and schools and churches that there is within all of them something separate from the people who are deemed the leaders of the organization. And what is there is this thing that I call a persistent residual culture of values that persists because it resides in the relationships of the people. And I believe you can walk into any business, any organization, and you will find a group of people who care about each other enough where they are sharing a set of common values that give them a reason to work there. And if they did not have those values and if they did not have those relationships, they would probably leave. So if you want to measure the quality of a company or the quality of the leadership of a company, look at the retention of their talent. The retention of talent is a measure of the persistent residual culture of values that persists because it resides in the relationships of the people. And I don't believe it's sufficient to say, well, they have a good health plan and they have a good salary base, and I don't think that's sufficient any longer because I think the world is too difficult to live in for those things, those simplified things of that we are told is all important. So over the next several weeks, we're going to talk. I'm going to talk more about this because what I want you to do is not necessarily believe what I'm saying. What I want you to do is decide that you're going to change your perception of who you are in the context of the world you live in. And I want to talk about what that perception is through these different frameworks that I have developed. Because at the end of the day, you, your family, your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers need you to take personal initiative to create impact that makes a difference that matters. And that impact is some kind of change which increases sustainability or strength or avoids some catastrophic thing that you see coming but you don't know what to do with. And so this is what I want to do over the next month and a half and have a conversation with. And if there is some interest, and please hit the hit the comment bar and tell me that there is an interest in having a a real world, real time conversation about this. And if there's sufficient interest, then we'll figure out a way to host that. And it may be once a week, it may be once a month, maybe one time only. We have a 75-minute call on Zoom where we talk about these things. And I'm welcome. I will, I am glad to do so. And if this is something that actually you feel like needs to be discussed within the circle of the place you work or in the circle of your family, I welcome that. The thing that I want, this is the last thing I want you to hear from me today. What I see we are creating as we seek to understand the world beyond our reach is to grasp a hold of what the generational memory of our lives, of our families, of our world is. To understand what took place 200 years ago and how that affects what is taking place this morning as I talk to you. Or in the case I've already mentioned, what took place after the First World War set up the course of globalization that we have been a part of for over 100 years now. And where does it go from where we are now as it struggles to maintain its preeminence? And and I think it's worth saying is I'm not telling I'm not saying anything critical about any person in particular. I think we've all made our choices. And and all I can say is we all can make new choices and we can all make change, create change. And we can all decide that we want to be different than what we have been. And I don't think, as I've said and I've written about it, I don't think that criticism is very helpful. And there's a lot of criticism out there. There's a lot of attacks. There's a lot of hatred. There's a lot of spite. And I see it on YouTube. I see it on Facebook. I see it somewhat on LinkedIn. And I find that the critics who are like that are simply demonstrating how weak they are, that they have nothing else to offer. There's nothing positive in what they say. They are defenders of a status quo which is failing all of us. And my hope would be that somehow they would wake up and say, I want to be different. I'm tired of being a purveyor of hatred, of displeasure. I want to be someone different. And the problem is, and this is part of what I will be talking about, is that the forms of society that we all are accustomed to living with, those forms have a power within them to resist change, and in many respects, structure is a form of resistance, where relationship and values and purpose and ideas and questions are all sources of positive change. So this is what I'm suggesting. I thank you for watching. I'm going to be writing about this. My plan is to post a Substack post on Fridays after these Thursday videos. They will be I will be placing all these videos into a playlist. I have not exactly figured out the title yet, but it's something like the change in the culture of leadership, something like that will be because what I ultimately want from for you is that you find your agency, you find your purpose, you find that you have something to offer this world far beyond anything you've ever experienced. Because I believe in your potential, and I believe that all the structures of the modern world are opposed to you fulfilling your potential. That's about as critical as I'm going to get. But I thank you for watching. I thank you for your support. If you can financially support me, either on an annual or a monthly basis, I appreciate that. That will be very helpful to me. Um, I don't like asking for money, but at the same time, us retired people need it, as as we have all who are retired understand in the dynamism of an economy which is in the midst of change. So I thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time here on the Eddy Network podcast. Bye bye.